Howdy, with this video I want to go over the poetry essay assignment. I'm doing this video for all three of my classes, 2 hybrid, 1 internet. So if I'm not referencing a specific course, that's why. But you should be able to go to material for poetry essay on the content page for the course. You'll see a few different documents. You'll see this poetry essay assignment, which I'm about to go over. Sample explication on a Robert Frost poem. You don't get to choose a Robert Frost poem, but that's what the sample explication is on. There's some notes on poetry terms, just simile, metaphor, synesthesia, onomatopoeia. All those terms on the assignment sheet. There's some notes there to help you out there. Then a little help sheet about how to write a good poetry explication. I got those downloaded already. We're going to start with the actual assignment. For this assignment, you're going to write an 800-word minimum explication of one of the following poems, and you're only going to choose one of these poems, and there's 8 to choose from there. We'll go over them here in a second. But an explication is a line by line or stanza by stanza. Generally, I suggest you go stanza by stanza. Informed response to a given work. Basically, you're giving your detailed response to the poem, but in the sense that you're unfolding the poem, you're not summarizing. I'm someone who really likes to summarize, so explications can be hard for me. But you want to kind of unfold and explain what's happening in the poem and why the poem's working a certain way. It's an excellent critical thinking skill. If you design a bridge and the bridge collapses, they're gonna, you can't just say, well, the bridge fall down and go boom. They're gonna want you to explicate, unfold what happened within the process of building the bridge that made it fall down, right? If you ever go to fire somebody and you don't want to pay the unemployment insurance, you might have to do an explication of why you're firing this person. This can be kind of a long process. If you're a religious person and if you go to church or temple or whatever, you're only going to find your preacher will generally do an explication of whatever religious text you're dealing with, right? They'll pick out a passage and unfold that passage, kind of unpack it, and tell you what it means in many different ways sometimes, or maybe one more profound way than you thought about before. So that's kind of what you should be thinking about in terms of explication, expanding on your ideas, unfolding what's happening in front of us. Some basic rules or guidelines. Your explication should not include biography or research of any kind. Just don't do that. Some of these poems you can't do it anyway, but like one is the Descent by William Carlos Williams. He's a fairly famous poet. Probably one of those famous poets you've never heard of, but don't tell me he was a doctor in New Jersey. I don't care. It has nothing to do with the poem. Do not do biography. Also, don't do any research. If I catch you doing some research on this or it pops up on Turnitin, the poems themselves probably will, but your commentary on the poem shouldn't. Maybe 1 or 2 words, but a whole passage should not be plagiarized, right? I got to use all the fun punctuation. You're going to find that brackets and ellipses are your friends with this essay. You have to manipulate the quotes that you're going to use for support to make sure they're grammatically in sync with the rest of your sentences. To easily follow 7 of the terms. There they all right there. All these poems are free verse, open form poems, so you probably won't get into rhyme scheme or foot and meter. But that term sheet that's on the content page will help you with some of these if you don't remember or if I didn't touch on them in the lectures. Of course, no it or you in the explication, unless you have some really personal experience. For example, if you've been in the military and you pick basic training, you might reference your experience in basic training just briefly, but you want to be focused on unfolding the poem, not your own personal experience. Just to run through the poems real quickly. Dant, Virginia, late summer. Dant, Virginia is a small was a coal mining town in southwest Virginia, and the poet's describing what's happening in that general area. I don't want to tell you, everything the poem's about because that's kind of going to be your job, right? Woman with Black Balloons, a good poem by Jan Wagner. Kind of a difficult poem because you think, well, what can you get out of balloons? And all of a sudden she's going in all kinds of interesting directions. But when you think about unfolding a poem or unpacking a poem, when you get to a color like these black balloons, what do we use black balloons for? Whether there's significance within the poem. You're going to get into all these kind of fun things. The Dog in the Night, another good poem by Gene Wagner. And when you go to think about how to organize your essay, generally I suggest spinning a paragraph on each stanza. A stanza is a collection of lines, like here's stanza 1, here's stanza 2. So this poem here has 5 stanzas. You might just end up doing a 5-paragraph essay, spinning a paragraph on each stanza. It's a nice way to organize what you're saying. Same thing here with the woman with black balloons. You got 1, 2, even one sentence or one line can be a stanza, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stanzas there. A good 6-paragraph essay would probably work well for that poem. A couple of these poems doesn't work that way. The Dog in the Night's just one long stanza, so you got to figure out where you're gonna put the breaks in your essay. But a very interesting poem that relates, an incident one night to all kinds of different interesting things. Numerology, a poem about turning 7 years old, how that was kind of a magical time in the persona's life, by Kathleen McKinley Harris. Hopefully as you read through these poems, a couple of these you're going to look at and you're going to go like, nope, never, no. But hopefully you'll land on 1 or 2 poems where you're like, I might be able to work with this, and you'll pick one that you can work with. The Descent, William Carlos Williams' poem, one of my favorite poems, but a very difficult poem. If you put a gun to my head and told me, what's this poem actually mean? I'm going to be like, it means ambiguity. It is a very ethereal, ambiguous poem. But I've had some excellent essays on it. Some students read this and go like, wow, I'm not sure what this meant, but this is really good. And that can be a good poem to work with in an explication where you can get into the multiple interpretations of what's happening and what you're seeing happening there. But yeah, some other people, if you're more of a science person, you might read this poem and go like, wow, okay, no. This would be the simile. Be careful, just because it's short may not be the best choice. Still got to get the 800 words out of it. Make sure you're going to be able to unfold, unpack the poem. You're going to have to discuss every single line in it. This kind of and when it says with apologies to Philip Larkin, that doesn't mean Philip Larkin wrote it. The author's actually referring to a Philip Larkin poem called This Be the Verse. And it's kind of an interesting poem to get into a little bit. But it's a little short, so the poem is. So be sure as you're thinking about what you want to write about that you can make the word count. Demolition Derby, another kind of short poem. This one by Sherman Pearl. Likes to write about father-son relationships. Again, this one's maybe a little short. Make sure you can get in there and explicate and unfold everything that's happening in each line. And the last one, Basic Training, another one by Sherman Pearl. Seems like a pretty straightforward poem till you hit the middle there, and all of a sudden somebody else is in the poem, and you're wondering what's happening, and you got to kind of figure that out and tell us what's happening there. So those are your choices. Kind of death by poison, death by firing squad, death by hanging. But hopefully you'll find one that you want to work with, that you can write a good essay on. I want to go over the How to Write a Good Poetry handout there. That was in that little section on the content page. Once you kind of pick your poem, you might want to print it off, mark the poem. You can also do this on screen, obviously. But make sure you read through it, go through every line, mark comments in the margins, kind of note words or lines you don't quite understand or don't quite make sense to you. Make sure you go back and try and figure those out. You can't just skip lines in an explication because you don't understand what it means. You got to get in there. You might say, well, this is ambiguous, right? Instead of saying we don't know, we say that's ambiguous and literature studies sometimes. But, look up the meanings of words you don't understand. Make sure you know what's going on there. Like in A Woman with Black Balloons, you're going to have to look up oomphaloo's. I had no clue what that was when I first read the poem. And just kind of figure out why she picked that word and what that word's doing within that poem there. Very important, there's no introduction or conclusion to the explication. So those 800 words are pretty intense. The first sentence of your essay should be in this poem by this writer, and then you get into line number 1. You start with line 1, and you go to the end of the poem and end with the last line or the last stanza or one last final thought. But you don't have an introduction or a concluding paragraph for this essay. That can throw students off a little bit because that's usually where you kind of fluff it up and get the word count with an essay. But this one, no introduction or conclusion, so be careful of that. Going starting with line 1 and ending with the last line in the poem, and then you're done. Make sure you go in as much a straight line as possible. Don't jump around in terms of time. Don't say, and as I said in that, about the first stanza, or if you're towards the end of the poem, all of a sudden jumping back to the first stanza for some reason. Try and go in as much a straight line as possible. Sometimes you might want to refer back, but be careful there. Keep the reader going straight through the poem. Don't omit any major sections or important words in the poem. Make sure you comment on all colors and things like that, important things that the poet's putting into the poem. No I, you, or it, unless the words are in direct quote. Again, if you have some personal experience, like with basic training, maybe a little bit about you, but to keep it super, super short. Make sure you use all the terms. You don't have to define them in there, but you should be using them correctly. And the trick to a good explication is you use frequent short quotes to, for example, in focus. You're going to cite using the line number from the poem. We'll see that here with the sample explication. You can, but instead of page number, you're going to be given line number. The page numbers will come in your works cited entry if there is one. And like it says, if you only quote one or two words that don't comprise a line, you generally don't need to cite those. You don't want to put them in quote marks, but hopefully you're assuming the reader's read the poem and is familiar with it. But stay focused on analyzing the poem. You might kind of go off on a side thought, but make sure you bring it back pretty quickly, because the idea is you're unpacking the entire poem, right? Not just saying, here's a poem about life, and life is strange and funny, isn't it? No, don't. Kind of make sure you're staying focused on the poem. But the short quotes are important. If you kind of tell me that numerology is about Obamacare, I'm going to be like, wow, this is going to be an interesting explication. I'm going to be interested to see how you use short quotes to support what you're going to say throughout your explication there. And if you find yourself not finding quotes that support what you're saying, you may be running into a problem. As always, we've worked on this all semester. Make sure you introduce and comment on all the quotes. Don't just throw a quote in there and move on. Tell us what that quote should support what you're saying. So make sure you're commenting on it. Same thing if you use a term, say, hey, Sherman Pearl uses a simile here. Make sure you tell us what the simile is and how it functions within the poem. And that's kind of how you unpack and unfold the poem. Brackets show a change to a quote. Ellipses show omissions. They're going to be, like I said, they're going to be your friends in this essay. In the explication with the commentary on the last line of the poem, or the last line of thought the poem produces in you, don't go back and say, in conclusion. That's no conclusion to this essay. Just have a good ending line of your own. Don't use a quote from the poem. End with your own thoughts. It's your essay. So kind of an interesting assignment. That's kind of designed to make sure you don't fluff it up with a big intro or conclusion, things like that, and that you stay focused on the poem. All right. If you need a break, this is a good place to pause the video, because I'm going to go ahead and get into the sample explication. And there it is. If you've never read Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken, make sure you might want to do that before you read the sample essay. It'll make a lot more sense to you. Again, you're going to choose one of those 8 poems from the assignment sheet. You don't get to do a Robert Frost poem. But basically, this assignment, the sample essay, is going to follow that How to Write a Good Poetry explication sheet. Alrighty. But again, no introduction, no biography of Robert Frost. Don't care that he read it, John F. Kennedy's inauguration, and stuff like that. Again, you're just focused on this poem, unpacking, explicating the poem, and telling us what you're seeing starting in the first line. You're going to see that this explication is organized stanza by stanza. The writer's going to spend a paragraph on each stanza in the poem. But once you do that, you're going to start going line by line through the poem and explicating that poem. So here, in the first stanza of his poem, The Road Not Taken, Robert Frost presents a scene familiar to all people through the persona of a traveler. You don't have to bold your terms when you use them. I just did this for the sample essay so you can see them working. Our traveler uses first-person narration to present us with the metaphor of 2 roads diverging in a yellow wood. Notice the use of brackets so that quote makes sense with the rest of my sentence there, right? And again, this is very much a grammar exercise, a sentence structure exercise, how to incorporate quotes and still have good sentence structure within your writing. So I told us there's a metaphor 2 words diverse in yellow wood, and a metaphor that represents the proverbial fork in the road we all encounter when making a life decision. In lines 2 and 3, and notice that I'm citing using line number. You can do it after the quote like this, just with the number, or you can do it in the introduction to the quote, or as you begin your discussion of those lines. Either way, it's fine. It's good to kind of mix it up so you don't have a lot of repetition in your sentence structure. In lines 2 and 3, you find that our traveler must make a choice and cannot remain static. Give a quote for support, and could not travel both and be one traveler. Ended that quote in the middle of a line, so I used the ellipses. You don't have to use brackets around the ellipses. I just do that. I like to see them because it makes it easier for me to search for ellipses when I'm grading papers. The persona's point suggests, and so I gave the quote, and I need to tell the reader what I think the quote's saying and how it supports what I'm saying. The persona point suggests that even if we decide not to choose, we're still heading down a path. If we choose not to marry, we've made a choice. If we choose not to have children, we've made a choice. Any life traveler must move forward in some direction. In addition, the narrator's observation of the color yellow for the wood indicates that the traveler encountering this decision must use caution. Whenever you get a color like black balloons or iron moon in damp Virginia late summer, you want to kind of discuss those colors and tell us what you think's happening with those colors. Color is a very interesting symbolic thing that doesn't always translate across cultures. But generally, yellow in our culture tends to mean caution. So, kind of getting into that a little bit. I'm gonna quit reading this word for word, but getting into that color yellow, spending a little time with it. The first stanza ends with the traveler peering down one of the roads to where it'd been in the undergrowth. Again, using short quotes to keep the reader focused on the poem as I'm going through the explication, but also just only using quotes to support what I'm saying, not have it say it for me. Because the traveler cannot see the future results of his possible journey down the first path. One problem with this particular explication, there's nothing Frost does in this poem to indicate that this persona is male. So if you're going to do that, you might want to try and justify, if you're going to start using, you might just use the first person they, right? Which is perfectly fine. The greater gains a sense of ambivalence regarding the traveler's choice. Which road will he choose? In the second stanza, ambivalence changes to ambiguity. Both roads appear to be equally untraveled. And the whole point of this explication is going to be, when we make these decisions, we don't know which the right one is, but we have to make one anyway. And then later on, we justify the decisions we made to our own advantage, which is what I think the poem's about. Other people have different interpretations. But you can kind of go through and you can kind of read this yourself. You can read faster than I can talk. But basically going through the poem stanza by stanza, showing the readers what the writer's showing the readers what they see happening in the poem, using short quotes for support, citing using line numbers. Then we're in the final stanza there. In this particular one, the writer went back to the title a little bit and said, this is why it's not the road less traveled, it's the road not taken, and kind of discussing the difference between the two, the significance of the title of the poem as it relates to the explication that was just given. A pretty good sample explication. Make sure you put the poem on a works citus page. If it's an unpublished poem like Damp Virginia Late Summer, or there's a couple in there that aren't authored, you don't have to put that on a works citus page. They're not published, and I know where you got them from. But if you have questions about it, be sure and let me know. It's an intense little assignment. It's easy to think, well, 800 words, that's a lot shorter than any of the other ones, but again, no introduction, no conclusion, no research in this one, so it's just you and the poem, and you showing us what's happening in that poem. I think that's about it. If you have any questions about it, be sure and let me know, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.